Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And first up, we begin, as we usually do, with the Chinese economy. China will raise basic pension payments for retirees by just 2% in 2025, the smallest annual increase on record, as the country grapples with a slowing economy and rising pressure on its state pension system. The adjustment, jointly announced by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security and the Ministry of Finance over the weekend, applies to all individuals who retired before the end of 2024. This marks the 21st consecutive year of pension increases, a practice mandated by China's 2011 social insurance law to ensure that pensions keep up with rising costs of living. However, the pace of hikes has slowed markedly in recent years. After a decade of 10% annual increases that significantly lifted pension levels, the rate began to fall sharply in 2016. It dropped to 6.5% that year, then steadily declined to 5% in 2020, 3.8% in 2023, and 3% in 2024. The latest 2% rise represents the steepest year-on-year deceleration in nearly a decade. Chinese financial media outlet Caixin writes today that the modest increase comes amid growing concern over the long-term sustainability of China's pension fund, as an aging population and decreasing birth rates weigh heavily on the system. Research from institutions including the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Wuhan University suggests the main pension fund could collapse within the next 10 years. This data was initially leaked and then soon had to be published, and was downplayed in state media. We note too that the pension system as it already exists is already deeply inadequate, with millions of pensioners in the poorest regions only receiving the equivalent of a few dollars a day. Xue Huiyuan, Deputy Director of Wuhan University's Center for Social Security Studies, has criticized widening inequalities. In 2024, the average monthly pension for an urban retiree was 3,825 yuan, $528, more than 15 times the 246 yuan, $34 received by rural retirees, a little over $1 a day to live on. Both of these are of course very low, but the rural rate is below the poverty line. And Chinese experts now warn that this fund only has a decade left before it's not even enough to cover this already very low rate. Next up for the economy. Chinese banks are under mounting pressure to stimulate consumer credit, but efforts are faltering amid a surge in personal loan defaults and waning demand from financially stressed households. Since March, regulators have urged lenders to ramp up and cheapen loans to support consumption as part of Beijing's broader strategy to counter the economic drag from its intensifying trade war with the United States. Initially, banks responded by slashing interest rates on personal loans to below 3%, but the rates soon crept back up over concerns about shrinking profit margins and rising credit risks. Loan managers say demand also remains weak, and many prospective borrowers are either reluctant or unable to take on more debt due to stagnant income and job insecurity. We've also seen over the last decade a surge in household debt. One branch head at a state-owned bank speaking to UK-based Reuters, for example, expressed, quote, "It's very difficult to find borrowers for consumer loans. Banks are caught between meeting lending targets and controlling bad loans," end quote. Defaults are rising sharply, particularly among smaller regional lenders. Bohai Bank's consumer non-performing loan NPL ratio surged to an incredibly high 12.37% in 2024, while Harbin Bank saw its figure climb to 5.51%. Even the massive central state-run Industrial and Commercial Bank of China reported a rise in its consumer non-performing loan ratio to 2.39% at the end of last year. Anything over 2% is considered concerning. In the first quarter of 2025, banks put up over 74 billion yuan, $10.3 billion in bad loans for sale, nearly triple the volume of a year earlier, with around 70% linked to personal borrowing. Some loan officers say their institutions now prioritize writing off NPLs over issuing new credit. This trend complicates Beijing's strategy. While boosting consumer lending may offer a short-term lift, economists like ING's Lin Song warn that only income-driven spending can ensure a sustainable recovery. But raising household incomes would require deeper fiscal reforms, including greater social spending by debt-laden local governments. A much heavier political lift. Peking University Professor of Finance Michael Pettis made the same observation over the weekend, expressing, quote, "The only sustainable way to do this is to reverse the transfers from the household sector that have left the household share of GDP so low. But these are the very same transfers that underpin the manufacturing and investment on which growth currently relies. It's good that policymakers finally understand the need to raise the household share of GDP, but they still aren't discussing why it will be so difficult." End quote. For now, anxiety about future income appears to dominate household behavior. A central bank survey found that over 61% of households plan to increase savings, up nearly 20 percentage points from pre-pandemic levels, highlighting the scale of the challenge for Chinese policymakers hoping to revive consumer confidence through credit alone. Next up, tensions between China and Japan have escalated following a series of close encounters between military aircraft over the East China Sea in recent days, prompting sharp exchanges between the two Asian powers. On Sunday, China's Ministry of National Defense accused Japanese reconnaissance planes of repeatedly entering its air defense identification zone, calling the incidents provocative. The accusations followed a Japanese statement 3 days earlier, alleging that a Chinese JH-7 fighter bomber had conducted, quote, unusual approaches, end quote, towards a Japanese YS-11EB intelligence aircraft on 2 separate days. Tokyo warned such maneuvers risk an accidental collision. Of course, if accurate, such a move is incredibly dangerous, and a collision would represent a serious crisis in the region, with very high risk of military escalation. In response, Chinese defense spokesperson Jiang Bin insisted Chinese forces had behaved, quote, professionally, end quote, and said Japanese reconnaissance activities were the root cause of the maritime and aerial tensions. The incident echoes similar clashes in June, highlighting persistent friction in the region despite diplomatic efforts to ease bilateral strains. Japan's foreign minister raised multiple security concerns during a meeting with their Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Kuala Lumpur last week, including alleged airspace intrusions, Chinese natural resource development in contested waters, and Beijing's growing military activity near Taiwan. Japan also voiced alarm over China's export controls on rare earths, strategic minerals vital in advanced manufacturing. Meanwhile, the US is reportedly urging Japan and Australia to clarify its positions in the event of a Taiwan crisis, intensifying pressure on Tokyo as regional tensions mount. With overlapping territorial claims, economic frictions, historical tensions, and Taiwan looming large, China-Japan relations are not only fragile, they are increasingly dangerous. Now, if you want to be on top of the most up-to-date analysis on China, including these tensions in the region and the wider US-led Western Cold War with China, consider subscribing to China Update. Hit the bell notification icon and you will be. And if you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help if you can hit that like button. There's only 2 clicks of the mouse, liking and subscribing, but it is a tremendous help for me and I very much appreciate it. Next up, and finally for today, China's solar industry is facing a paradox. While the country cements its dominance as the world's renewable energy powerhouse, a brutal supply glut is wreaking havoc on manufacturers of critical components like polysilicon. In a bid to stabilize the sector, China's largest polysilicon producers are now working on an unprecedented industry-led bailout plan, even as the country forges ahead with record-breaking solar and wind installations. According to Chinese financial media outlet Yitai, top players including Tongwei Co. Limited and GCL Technology Holdings Limited are spearheading efforts to establish a new joint company that will acquire distressed rivals, absorb their debts, and consolidate excess production capacity. The move is aimed at reining in a price war that has driven down margins and forced weaker players to the brink. Insiders say the company will also manage production volumes, sales, and inventory across the sector to restore supply and demand balance. Negotiations for the rescue plan began earlier this year and have reportedly secured support from major producers, financial institutions, and potential acquisition targets. The effort reflects growing urgency within the industry and in Beijing to arrest a deepening crisis that threatens to undermine the long-term sustainability of China's solar manufacturing dominance. Ironically, the oversupply of polysilicon, which has contributed to plunging solar module prices, has played a role in enabling China's meteoric growth in solar capacity. New data from the Global Energy Monitor, GEM, highlights the scale of China's clean energy expansion. The country is currently fast-tracking a massive 1.3 terawatt pipeline of utility-scale solar and wind projects with 510 gigawatts already under construction. To put that in perspective, China is building roughly 74% of the global utility-scale solar and wind capacity now under construction. Once complete, these projects will add to China's existing 1.4 terawatts of operating renewable capacity, a figure that already dwarfs the installed capacity of most major economies. In 2024 alone, 141 gigawatts of new solar and wind was brought online. Of course, the cost of this success, as we have seen, is massive wasteful overcapacity. China also continues to lead in offshore wind, with more than half of all global offshore capacity currently being built located in Chinese waters. However, GEM notes that growth in the segment has slowed in recent years, suggesting the need for more coherent national-level policy frameworks to replace the current fragmented provincial approach. While the scale of China's green energy push is staggering, the turbulence within its manufacturing sector reveals the costs of rapid expansion without adequate coordination. The price war in polysilicon, triggered by unchecked capacity growth and exacerbated by slowing global demand, has made clear that even a dominant industry can falter under its own weight. We are already seeing this in the EV sector. Still, the proposed bailout plan signals the major players are willing to take collective action to safeguard the sector's future. If successful, it could serve as a model for market stabilization efforts in other parts of China's clean energy supply chain. As China charges ahead with its renewable energy ambitions, the balance between industrial policy, market forces, and environmental goals remains delicate. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Monday, have a productive week, and I will see you for a new episode tomorrow.